I hope so.
Yes, but we have the two of you here, so that would not stop us from diving deep down into unraveling this conversation as we unravel, bringing social sector into the mainstream, really unraveling the potentiality of the social space. And, I'm extremely delighted to introduce our moderator for the session, MJ Arvind. He's here. It's an honor to have also Payal Nath, who's already amidst us.
Thank you.
So we have, MJ, do we have 3 speakers for?
Yeah, we have Nalini Shekhar and Trilochan Shastri.
Yes.
So they must have tried because we were all waiting.
Yeah, it's possible because we are actually running a few minutes behind.
So we'll just give them a few minutes.
Absolutely, yeah. So do you want to set the tone for this conversation while they make their way in? Or would you, because we are running behind, so I'd like for us to catch up a little bit on time also.
Yeah, 1 minute. I'll just call up Trilochan.
Sure, of course.
Hi, this is Arvind. We are already on. I know, same. Anyway, now they let us in.
They'll be let in.
Just try now.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Nalini Shekhar, I don't have a number.
I'm on.
Oh, you're on. Very well.
Yes, yes.
So let's get started. So what we want to talk about is social media. And my name is Arvind. Can you see the screen? Can you see my slides?
Yeah, Arvind, I'm sorry, just actually about the screen. We're not able to share the screen at the moment. We're not, that's because of the paucity of time, we're not able to. So if we can just have a conversation instead, I would appreciate that. So apologies.
Happiness.
Would that be okay?
Happiness. In fact, I post all of them to create slides. So I'm going to get beaten up later by them.
It's okay. You can call me. I really apologize.
So let me give you my background. I spent over 30 years in the corporate.
You can just turn the screen sharing off. That would be.
Pardon?
If you can just turn the screen off, and then we can just view each other's beautiful radiant faces. Wonderful, wonderful. Arvind, over to you.
Trilochan is also there. Good.
Great. We have a full house. Yes.
So let me start by introducing myself, and then we'll go around the room. My name is Arvind, and I spent over 30 years in the corporate sector before I moved on to venture capital and then to the social sector. I now run a foundation called Dhwani Foundation, and this is out of Bangalore. And what we do is work to see how the social sector could become more accountable, more transparent, and more acceptable to other stakeholders. So therefore, this as a subject that we have today makes a lot of sense for what I do. So Payal, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, hi, I'm Payal. I also come from not the social sector, but I'm happy that by accident I have moved into the sector. I worked in the industry, in the footwear technology sector for a couple of years with Italian companies and with Indian multinationals. By chance, luck brought me to this, and I'm thankful to the stars that I got me to this beautiful space where I think most of India lives, the rural sector. Yes, and as we speak later, I think I'd love to talk about my work more than myself. Thank you.
Dr. Trilochan?
Yeah, I teach at IIM Bangalore, and I've been involved with the social sector for more than 20 years.
Terrific. Nalini?
Hi, I'm Nalini Shekhar. I work with Waste Pickers in Bangalore, and I've been part of the social sector for more than 3 decades now. So I've worked in India and United States, working on immigrants' rights and migrants' rights.
Terrific. So what I wanted to do to set the tone, because I know all of you come with varied experience, different experiences, was to first talk about the issues that face the social sector. And the first is of apathy and indifference. Most people don't care or are not enough concerned to get involved into what the social sector or into social issues at all. And most people just are looking after themselves, their family, their immediate surroundings. So that's issue one. Issue two is one of credibility. There is this larger belief that a lot of the social sector is filled with people with dubious intentions and so on. The third is of competence. That when you walk into the social sector, you don't see enough efficiency, enough productivity. There is a lot of waste. And the fourth is, if I may put it, I would call it marketing savvy. That in spite of all the good work that is being done in the social sector, clearly they are not able to market themselves. And therefore, after all this good work, they are still perceived to be not there at all. So with that, I'll pass the baton on to Dr. Trilochan to first give his take of what is.
Yeah, very interesting questions. Actually, most of the people in India are very interested in the what you have called social sector, because most of the people that I work with, we work with at least 35,000 people in the rural areas. So the people whom you are referring to is the upper middle class, Bangalore, Delhi, people who speak with a clubbed accent and who've been to USA and London. They are not bothered. I am also not bothered about them. I find there's no problem at all, because the people in the villages are very much concerned about all these issues. So that's my take on that. And this question of accountability is very important, but who is accountable to whom is the question. So the framework in which that question has been framed is that NGOs take money from donor agencies and are not accountable to them. Perhaps not fully accountable to them, or whatever the term is. I think we need to be accountable to our mission and our cause, whatever we are working for. And be accountable, like if Nalini is working with rag pickers, then we need to be accountable to the rag pickers. Now, we never consider such things. We think we should be accountable to some donor. Of course, we should be accountable to some donor. I'm not saying that. But our primary accountability is for the work we do and for the people that we work with or work for. So let me stop here. That's my view.
Yeah, I won't disagree with that. So Nalini, would you like to take on the baton from here?
Yeah, sure. So for me, as Trilochan says, my accountability first is to the community I work with. And obviously, if you have taken money, you have to be responsible of using it. And our books are always open to waste pickers. Anytime they can come and see. We may not be open to many others who are there. So accountability for us is first for the community we work. But talking about third sector, when you, we're talking, this is going on for a long time, no? The first freedom struggle we had, or the during emergency, the people who had taken a lot of trouble to fight for the freedom. Then again, when you write for the Dalit communities, when you work. So all these are there. It's so much of involvement of people in doing decision making, in taking over what they want to do. But so now it is all trying to be professionalized with whatever. I mean, before you start the project, okay, where is the data coming from? What will be your indicators of work? Really, if you work on the field, the first thing is organically all that should evolve. So the third sector has played a huge role in COVID. It has shown that the government failed utterly in the beginning. Of course, now they are picking up to do things, but it's the social sector or the third sector which actually stood up. And I would say just not the organization, but the citizens also. Citizens stood up and worked. So there are a lot of advantages of having this sector, looking at it. As you said, okay, you want transparency. Transparency, nobody is questioning it. It has to be there. Whether it's for the government, whether it's for the funders, or whether it is for our own selves or the community. So transparency is very, 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 very essential. But the thing is, in the name of transparency, in the name of report writing, we should not kill this sector. The freedom required to do certain things cannot be cut with compliances or with the law. So I'll stop at that, and I'll pick it up when we start for the next one.
Yeah, Payal, what do you have to say to that?
See, I was a part of, founder member of an NGO that we have right now based out of Bengal called Kadam. So I can speak from the NGO perspective, but also I was working in the corporate sector earlier who were funding, so I can speak from that angle as well. But I see the people who are funding, the people who are implementing, and the people for whom it is being funded, all are equal stakeholders in the whole thing. And they all have to work as a team. And I think the results best come out there. And I think for that to happen, there is no rocket science. It's just, and more in COVID, like what you rightly said, Nalini ji, the collaborative effort, the relationships are becoming stronger than any sort of systems that might have been built. Foolproof systems have failed. Apparently, systematic systems have failed. But it is just these relationships which have helped, in every aspect, whether it is of the social sector. I work primarily in rural, so I can say in rural areas as well, the people that we work with, they were like the role models. They were carrying the baton further to showcase to everybody that we are with you, because we have people who are supporting us in the background as well. And we had further people who were supporting us in the background. So it was the teams which sort of helped each other, and nobody was asking us for how did you actually spend the money. So kind of the relationship which we've all had built over the years came in handy. So I feel, yes, it's important, but relationships are far more, and in collaborations are far more important.
Thank you. So Nalini, I'd like to take up what you said about transparency is all very good, but when it comes in the way of, what could it come in the way of?
The whole, when you are asking about transparency is not an issue at all. But when, if you want to take up, for a simple example, when I take up money from a CSR, and when I take money from citizens who have given us, or many times our waste pickers also contribute to our work in Hasrudala, the level of compliance required is the same. Whether you take 1 rupee or 1 lakh, it is the same. But the ease of business is much easier when you are taking money from the individuals and the community, because our relationship is based on trust, right? And the CSR money, when we take, many of them are good, but we prefer foundations because they understand our work much better. But in CSR, there is a set ways of doing it. Youngsters who get into this space today, MSW people prefer CSR money than working on the ground. The number of people who work on the ground have become very limited at that age. Today, you see 40 plus people who have been phenomenally working on the grassroots, but you don't see youngsters as much as we used to do when we started. So the kind of attraction the money has in terms of work, in working, professionalizing this whole sector. So professionalization should come with a commitment, not just with a nowadays I see many people talking about poverty, sitting in their homes, sitting in their AC rooms, sitting and working on the computer. It doesn't come that way. So the compliance, when the compliance or reporting style become more than what happens on the ground, that is where the balance is lost. So there should be a balance of it. Nobody is questioning transparency. Every rupee has to be accounted for. Nobody is talking about it. But it does, the different kinds of reporting systems that we are bringing, that will definitely affect the effectivity that we have on the ground. So the number of people, for example, Hasrudallah is a very, very, very grassroots organization. For almost 7-8 years, we had very little funding. So we had a lot of people on the grassroots doing it. Now, when we are having funding, the work has improved and increased and everything. But the number of people we hire for management is far more than what we have ever done. Because we have to report, we have to do certain kind of compliances and so on. So that is another challenge that we have right now in this sector. And also the funding that comes doesn't come for lot of rights issue. For welfare, you will get it. COVID, we raise funds like crazy. It is not questioning anybody, no. It's just servicing some people who really desperately need it.
We will come to that next. We'll come to some causes which find very little acceptance versus some others. But Professor Trilochan,
Yes, sir.
this talk of transparency versus what Nalini is saying about oversight, do you think oversight is too much today, whether it is from the government or whether it is from donors?
Definitely. I agree with her 100%. Definitely.
And why do you say that?
See, we also work in the grassroots. I only believe in working in the grassroots. Now, what we find is our chaps who are working in the villages, they get a princely salary of 10 to 15,000 rupees a month. Okay? And they're doing fantastic work according to me. They're local people with local degrees, and the kind of work they're doing, I can bet half my wealth that none of these guys who went to fancy schools and fancy IIMs or IITs, they cannot do that work. It is beyond their capability. But when the donor comes and says, give me this report and that report, we have to hire these fancy English-speaking guys, as I said, the guys who speak with a proper accent and blah, 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 and who know the Queen's English. So these kind of guys, they come in and you pay them fancy salaries, because here in this world, you pay peanuts, you get monkeys, you get peanuts, all these kind of philosophies are there, and you have to do this compliance and that compliance and be transparent. It completely demotivates 100 field staff that are working there at 10,000 rupees. He says, yaar, मैं धूप में जाके मैं सड़ रहा हूँ, गांव में घूम रहा हूँ. I'm working in the villages at a pittance, and these guys who are sitting in their AC rooms in Bangalore and Delhi, they are getting fancy salaries for just writing. अंग्रेजी में लिखने के लिए उनको पैसा मिल रहा है. So this creates a huge imbalance. And I've been telling the donors, see, if you don't trust us, don't fund us. If you trust us and you still want to verify, you please go yourself. Don't ask me to write the report. Go and talk to anybody in the village. Now there is a whole brand of evaluators and impact assessors and consultants who have never seen the backside of a village. I saw people who are dressed, like some fashion show, going into the villages, speaking with their quaint accents and trying to do an impact evaluation. The only thing that poor girl knows is that she knows a bit of English and she has the right connections and the right accent. Now, what the hell is she going to evaluate in the village? So the whole thing has become a joke. अरे अगर भरोसा है तो पैसा दो, भरोसा नहीं है तो मत दो पैसा. ವಿಶ್ವಾಸ ಇದೆ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಹಣ ಕೊಡಿ, ವಿಶ್ವಾಸ ಇಲ್ಲ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಬೇಡ, ನಿಮ್ಮ ಹಣ ನಮಗೆ ಬೇಡ. That's all. It's as simple as that. And you go and verify. The whole energy of the most precious thing in an NGO are the top few people. Their mind space, their bandwidth, most of it spent in buttering up the donor agencies and writing these goddamn English reports, instead of worrying about the work and hiring, like Nalini said, you hire all these people, management people with fancy salaries, who whose hearts are all bleeding for the poor as long as they don't have to see their face and don't have to work there. So ऐसे कैसे होगा? It's gone to the other extreme. The best donors are the HNIs. There are some rich individuals, some of them are very famous in India. If by God's grace he or she says, "Arey yaar, paisa le le," it's like prasadam, naivedyam, mahaprasadam. They trust you, you do the work, you go and show them whenever they want anything, you show them. They don't sit and breathe down you because they trust you. If you don't trust, don't fund. And don't burden the organization with all this nonsense.
Payal, what do you have to
Let me
say?
close one thing. Arvind, just one last question. I'll just ask a question. Whom do you work for? Do you work for the donor? Or do you work for the mission? Or do you work for the community? Let us be very clear on whom we work for. And if that answer is there, everything falls into place.
Very good.
So I'll take it further from here. What Mr. Trilochan said, Trilochan ji and Nalini ji said. So, you know, for us, we started because of passion. I think most of us who moved into this sector because we have a passion to serve or do whatever we do. So when we started, we had no donors. We put in our own money because we love doing what we do. And when we started, the impact showed. The community, the entire rural area, whichever one cluster, it flourished. That's the time when funders started to approach us that whatever you've done in this sector, can you take it and do it in another area of the area that we will give it to? And these are the funders who are genuine funders who really wanted that kind of impact. So when that happens, something like that happens, they will ask us to make a report as to what is it that you're going to do in that area. And in the space of livelihood, it becomes a little bit easier because, you know, we are creating livelihood solutions for these people. So these people will be earning money, right, at the end. So at the end of 3 years, the impact, their bank accounts will show. We don't even have to have, we've helped them to have bank accounts, we've helped them to have market linkages, we've helped them to have training institutes, whatever. Same thing like what you said in terms of reports, there are no lengthy, long reports. We say the impact is going to be, if the funder has spent 2,000 per rural person per month, at the end of 3 years, everybody would be earning 3,500 per month on a regular basis. So you can come and check the bank accounts of everybody from where it is coming. So it becomes easier in such a case, whereas the return on investment is very evident or tangibly visible, you know. So in our case, it's not such an issue, but I get that in terms of health, in terms of so many other, you know, aspects. Yes, it can be an issue where Trilochan sir said, yes, it can be a huge issue. It is dampening the spirit sometimes. My craft managers or the field workers, I think, are heroes. And on our social media, we are promoting them, that these are our heroes, we bring them. And it feels nice because they are also right now, everybody right now nowadays is on Facebook. So they love it that they are there and being showcased. And that is what boosts them, not the salary, not the report making, nothing. Until they are charged, the work on the field will happen. So yes, I mean, in livelihood sector, like I mentioned, where we work, it's a little bit easier, much harder work, but a little bit easier, the relationship and the rapport. Harder work is trying to understand how will we convert from earning nothing to 3,500 at the end of 3 years. That transition, thinking, visioning, that is harder. But that, the village people themselves make it easy for us because we have discussions with them. So again, relationships, I mean, for us, the mantra has been pure, simple relationships and understanding and be truthful to each other. Yeah.
But I think you are saying something different from what the other two said, which is that you are talking of impact and you are saying you are prepared to make the effort to show this impact to the others outside of the community members. This is not what one heard Trilochan and Nalini say.
You see, I mentioned in my sector, which is the livelihood space, it's easier to show the impact.
No, it doesn't matter which sector it is.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. But you are prepared to make the effort while the other two seem to, what shall we say, resent it or dislike it, believe it's a waste of time.
No, no, no. I didn't
I
never
don't
said
think
this.
so. I didn't get that
I never
impression
said that.
either. I didn't get
No,
that
no, no, no,
impression,
no, not
MJ.
at all.
Yes, yeah.
See, in any sector, you can definitely look at impact. That is not an issue at all. Whether, I mean, today we asked BBMP to give ID cards to waste pickers. So 7,500 people have, ID card, occupational ID card, which was never done in India. And after that, we really pushed the government. Now, nationally in 2016, it became a law. So every waste picker in every part of the country need to have waste ID card. So it's a law now. That is a huge impact, just not the numbers. Even numbers you can count in that. You look at women never used to run what we call in Bangalore as dry waste collection center, which is a kind of PPP model with the government. We told government PPP model don't have to do it with the companies. You can do it with people like waste pickers, and they have done it. And we have so many women waste pickers today running the dry waste collection center. That is also an impact. Have we done the study? Have we done the numbers? Everything is there. We have no problem in reporting. What we are talking about over-reporting, and before starting saying, okay, you do the study and tell us what is the data points that you are going to take, what is the impact. So what I'm saying is in this sector, especially in the CSR, the maturity is still, I mean, it's very young. What we expected and what it is today is very different. It is very young, and we have to kind of look at impacts beyond numbers. Like there is no black and white. Like you said that we said that we are not willing to do it. It's nothing like that. We are doing it. Everything is on open. It's waste because themselves have made stories about the impact that they have made. That is not the thing. What I'm telling is there should be a balance, and also the kind of compliance you put should not impact the kind of strong work we do on the ground. So there should be a balance. That's what we say.
I agree with you there, because it's not always about the tangible, things that are visible. There are so many invisible. Just like Bhutan, they have their happiness quotient, which is also measured. It's not just always the GDP or how much economic growth has happened. So those sort of things are still missing. Are very rightly mentioned that it's still very young, and I'm sure it will evolve. Tata Strife is already looking at putting these sort of points into their programs. So I always look at the silver lining in the situations as I do feel it will come up, because I mean everybody is realizing that social sector is here to stay, and that is going to be a game changer. In the handicraft sector, I mean, actually, when we work in the rural areas, we work primarily with handicrafts because most of it is a non-farm sector. And then they have small lands, they're doing farming. Post that, they have a couple of hours, they can generate some income and have a healthy relationship and have a sense of ownership for doing whatever products that they're making or whatever. So, it sort of, in the rural sector, in the space when I notice the kind of, like right now, 10 Sustainable Development Goals are fulfilled out of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So I see the way it is expanding, the way World Bank is approaching us, so many international as well as national bodies are approaching us for progressing and working in this space, which means the social sector is here to stay. And rural is, I mean, it forms a major part of our country, right? I mean, Mahatma Gandhi said in 1940s, 700,000 villages. India comprises of 700,000 villages. Even in 2020, we can say India comprises of 600,000 villages. So we have a huge population living in rural areas. And yes, social space is here to stay because it is talking about fulfilling most of the sustainable development goals set up by the nation.
Professor Trilochan, there is some statistics that I saw, I don't know how correct it is, which says that ignore CSR and the money which comes from CSR. Overall in India, the total amount of philanthropy, all considered, is far less than in a lot of other countries. And in the US, it was shown to be the highest. First, is that correct? And second, if it is correct, why should it be so? Why are we giving less?
Very important questions. you're possibly quoting the Bain report, and there are various reports which come out once a year, once in 2 years. And all the reports are saying exactly what you're saying, Mr. Arvind, that the reported donations, even adjusted for per capita and etc., is much high. United States is by and large the highest, and we in India are way behind. You can't say it is only because we are poor. It's also because when you look at the percentage of personal incomes and percentage of GDPs, we are much lower than the other countries. I think they also, those very same reports give the reasons, and I'm also speaking from whatever we have observed in our work. There are 3 or 4 reasons why the giving is less. One is a lot of money goes to temples and churches and mosques, which is fine. I mean, nothing wrong with that. A lot of donation goes there. And there is also, like you started off this conversation, there's a lot of, there's a gap between the donors and the social sector in some sense, because there's no trust. So many people say, we don't know whether our money is going to be used properly or not. And the third thing also is that there are increasingly a lot of people who don't know what to do, whom to give the money to. So now we have new platforms coming up who are saying that we will, quote unquote, vet or assess, or whatever the word is, good NGOs and put them in touch with those who want to donate. Because many of these people don't have the wherewithal to go and verify each and every cause that they're donating to. So they go by some other third party who says, no, these people are doing good work, these people are not doing so good work. So these things are also happening. So there is a bit of an information gap. I think these are the major reasons why, and of course, you know, like any sector, and I don't think the social sector is free of that. There are NGOs and NGOs out there. Not all of them are like Nalini's or Payal or, you know, the good ones out there. Many of them are maybe well-intentioned but not effective. And unfortunately, a few of them are also a little corrupt. So you know, if there is one corrupt NGO out of 100, that gets blown up. And the general impression is created that these are all lazy, corrupt people. You know, there are a lot of people who believe that. So these are some of the reasons. I think we need to, there is a lot of highlighting of good stories and good people, which is good. So we need to continue doing that. But the basic level of mistrust has to come down. That's what I feel. That's the reason. At a national level, I mean, there are very good stories. We get funding from people who really love us, who trust us, and who are satisfied with the impact. And like Nalini, we also say, you please go and assess the impact. That's not the issue. So
one conjecture that I've heard is that it is a Hindu problem. And the Hindu problem is, to us, duty means duty to the parent, duty to the child, and at best, duty to your siblings. All else doesn't matter. So we have less of a civic sense, if you want to call it that. And we are more about believing that as long as we do all of this, we make it. So what do you have to say about that, Payal?
You see, I have also a great...
Sorry to interrupt. You know, we've almost run out of time as well. So shall we take 2 minutes to close this conversation? Would that be okay, Arvind?
Yep, fine.
Okay, thank you.
So last words, Payal, and then Nalini, and then Professor.
The last word, not to answer the question, but in general, is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I'm a great optimist. And I feel there is so much of opportunity with such a large population, human resource that we have. And it's through the social sector that we can actually make that happen. And we have a lot of good people who are funding and a lot of good people who are implementing. So if we just focus on those who are doing good jobs and not focus on the ones who are not able to implement, you know, I think funders there is no dearth of good funders and there is no dearth of good people who are working. It's just sort of marrying or matchmaking the two, and the huge population, 1.3. I mean, I just speak about the rural sector. In my handicraft sector itself, 7 million people are engaged, and 1.51% of handicrafts is being exported today out of all the exports of our country. So the kind of good that we can do if we can convert that as an equity of our country and converge it. It's only through this social space that we can make that happen. So I'm an optimist.
Thank
and
you.
I rest my case.
Thank you. Nalini.
So social sector, now we call it third sector, whatever. So I think without that, there is no nation building. In COVID, it very clearly showed that government didn't have the ground intelligence to do anything. So they had to depend on us. We had to depend on them for their services. So I feel their contribution, the third sector contribution is so high, and they are part of the nation building. And it's just nation building doesn't mean it's just the creation of job and wealth. It is also human sources that human resource that we all build.
Great. Professor.
Actually, both of them have said it so well. So I'll just speak to the young people, if there are some young people out there. If you want to have a rich, fulfilling life and enjoy your life and have a lot of fun, make great friends, and also really feel satisfied that you have done something useful, there's nothing like the social sector today. You meet outstanding human beings, both in the community and your fellow workers, and you can have an absolutely wonderful life if you focus on the positive. So please go ahead and do it. That's what I would say.
Amen to that. Mansi, all yours.
Thank you so much, Arvind. Thank you to each one of you speakers. It's been a delightfully intriguing discussion, so many awakening moments, like aha moments, and very diverse perspectives from each one of you. And you're all a legacy unto yourselves. So thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. Trilochanji, would you like to say something?
I want to thank Arvind for being such a fantastic moderator.
Yes, I think
taking all the flag and not expressing his views, but asking other people for their views. Thank you, Arvind.
Yeah, I think
that's true.
It's just because I know less. That's why.
No, I think you have your own views, but you're playing the role of a moderator. So thank you.
Really
Thank you all.
stirring the discussion up. That's what you need as a moderator. So that's really wonderful. Thank you, Arvind. Thank you, Payal, Trilochanji, Nalini, for the work that you do and the people that you are. And we'd like to take this moment to, present to you awards, virtual awards for the very first time on behalf of the All Ladies League, presenting to you at the Digital Women Economic Forum. We acknowledge you as leaders and women, leaders, the men, and women as of the decade on social impact, the third sector. Thank you, congratulations. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the wisdom that you represent. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
The virtual awards will be in your mailbox shortly. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you. With that, we are going to continue unraveling day one of the Women Economic Forum Digital Summit, Global Digital Summit at Bangalore. And we have now for you a keynote address by someone very special, someone who represents a plethora, a lifetime of experience. And we'll just wait a minute as he joins us. We're at the mercy of technology sometimes, so we wait patiently. And I think technology has a really beautiful message it teaches us, that, to really be resilient in the face of adversity and change. We're all, we're all learning the ropes, how to walk the, the new way of being. And I think it's really a powerful reminder that we adapt and flow with it with a smile. So if you're, if you're all tuned in, I think we can all take this moment here as I thank you for your time through the day, taking out precious moments out of your beautiful Saturday afternoon, evening, night, wherever in the world you are, to really, just offer gratitude for the blessings that we are surrounded by in life, not just technology, the digitalization, I apologize, that makes all of this possible for us to connect our hearts through through different places in the world, but still in the comfort of our homes. It's absolutely an extraordinary experience to be a part of this digital web. But let's take a moment here to really offer gratitude for the blessings that we're surrounded by, despite whatever we're going through, despite this pandemic. I was in Rishikesh right before we went into the lockdown, and there they say at the ashram that, the world is talking about corona, and here we're talking about karuna. So I think it's really a time to shift the focus, really shift the spotlight into a heart space, into a space where we are able to acknowledge, offer gratitude on a moment-to-moment basis. We have already amidst us our speaker for the afternoon. Good afternoon, sir. Thank you for joining us.
Good afternoon, Mansi.
Good afternoon, sir. Thank you for taking our time. I know you're busy, and it's a privilege for me to have you here, but also introduce you and your magnificent body of work to our audiences. So I'd like to take this moment here to introduce to you Mr. Ramasubramaniam. He is the former Reserve Bank of India Deputy Governor. He's an accomplished central banker for over 37 years. It's remarkable. That's, more than a lifetime for some people. And he's currently a consultant advising banks, financial companies, fintech entities, payment system entities, investors and funders on subjects ranging from financial regulations and Indian economy. Ladies and gentlemen, we have an expert in the house like no other. He's a prolific speaker, and it's my honor to hand you in the trusted hands of Mr. R. Gandhi. Ramasubramaniam, please, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Mansi. Good evening, everybody. I'm very, very happy to be addressing all of you through this web conference, and the ladies who have taken the lead to be at the helms of the wheels of the production and helping the economy in terms of increasing the employment income level and thereby standard of living. That's what economics is for. So I am very, very happy to be addressing all of you. Today, I want to be discussing something not about COVID, because there is any number of people who would have already been talking about that. I want to take you to certain developments which have implications for the medium to long term, both in the banking and the financial sector. So that's what I want to be talking to you during this next 10 minutes or so. So since long, almost for more than 20 years, I have been addressing seminars like this, and very often the subject that has been assigned to us has always been about the banking, the challenges that are facing the banks and the financial institutions. So very often the consistent themes had been two influences all these 20 odd years whenever I have been addressing. One is the regulation, the other is technology. These two have been consistently, persistently, and continues to be having strong influence on the way the banks and the financial institutions are growing and working not just in India and throughout the world itself. So the themes have been very recurring. So regulation has been primarily driven by international consensus on standards and best practices arrived after their discussions in the platforms like the Basel Committee or the Financial Stability Board. So that has been the primary engine of bringing in changes in the regulatory structure across the banking and financial sector. Whereas technology Technology has been redesigning the banking and banking experience of the customers in entirely unanticipated ways. In your first fire shot today, you all had a discussion with my ex-colleague and good friend, Mr. Kasa Sudhakar. He had explained quite a bit about the digital banking. So the technology has been adding layer and layer of new technology-based products and services. It has transformed the front office, back office, and the middle office functions of banks and in unimaginable ways. Today, rarely any one of us need to go to be visiting a bank branch physically. We can do all types of transaction bank and avail all types of services from banks, sitting in our home or while on the move, availing any number of channels through which we can avail the services, whether it's ATM, phone banking, internet banking, IoT banking, mobile banking, open banking, RTGS, NEFT, IMPS, UPI. I can go on and on about the various products and services that has been offered by the banking system. Whether it is deposit or by borrowing or remittances or payments, everything happens through the technology-based offerings by the banks. Today, as I said that, I'm going to talk about the certain developments which have been caused by the confluence of the regulatory changes, regulatory-driven initiatives, and also the technology-prompted offerings in the financial sector. Not just banking. Again, I am emphasizing it is for the entire financial sector. These are of recent origin. Many of you might not have heard about them or know about them. That's why I thought I chose to speak about them so that wider information gets disseminated across all segments. And these have, as I said, very far-reaching influences to all of us, both as individuals and as businesses. Let me explain. A key aspect of technology is that its capacity to manage humongous data centrally, consistently, and make up to the moment, not just up to date, up to the moment data available in a very, very cost-effective way. Building on this capacity, set a new and common banking and financial sector service infrastructure have been established in our country, and I will explain that about in a few minutes. So finance effectively relates to and revolves around assets, liabilities, transactions, and creating charges on those assets like a charge or mortgage or pledge and like. There are any number of institutions like banks, mutual funds, companies, and others who issue financial assets like deposits, units, ventures, bonds, etc. Anyone may have invested in any number of such institutions and such financial instruments by any number of institutions. Likewise, there are any number of institutions like banks, non-banking finance companies, and corporates and business firms which provide loans and advances. Any entity might have borrowed monies from several of these institutions. Financial transactions need a high assurance on certainty of the underlying assets and liabilities, not just ownership thereof. The integrity of financial transactions also need authenticated information about the encumbrances like the charges, mortgages, etc. Till recently, there had been no single authentic way to know about the financial assets and liabilities of or about the encumbrances entered into by a person, business, or entity. Now, thanks to technology and the guidance given by the respective regulators, such as the financial infrastructure has been established in India for the benefit of, as I said, individuals, businesses, banks, financial institutions, government, and all other stakeholders. Further, for businesses to grow, they need to constant infusion of capital. Capital providers, be it equity capital or debt capital, are always in search for, again, authentic and wholesome financial information and analysis thereof. Authentic and up-to-date information from very reliable source will be a boon to in such circumstances. India has now established such an information infrastructure. 4 new types of institutions have been established in the last 5 years or so. They are: 1, the information utility under the new insolvency and bankruptcy code, the account aggregators under the aegis of the Reserve Bank of India, and the Central Registry of Security Interest, that's CERSAI, and the GST network. These are the 4 things I want to talk a little more about. GSTN, all of you are very, very familiar. So it is a national information utility. It keeps the complete record of all the commercial transaction of entities, business entities, when they sell and buy goods and services. So it has a complete collection of all this information. So going forward.
I'm sorry for interrupting. You know, the session gets automatically cut off. So
yeah.
I think we'll have to close in about 2 minutes.
Yeah, I'm finishing.
Oh, okay. I'm so sorry.
Okay. So going forward, this GSTN, I can easily visualize that the GSTN data can be made available at the option and consent of the taxpayer to any person or entity as the taxpayer will deem appropriate. Maybe the taxpayer wants to provide authenticated information about his business to his lenders, current or prospective lenders, or to his financial advisor, or to his business associates. So this network will help them. The CERSAI is an institution where it provides a platform for registering security interest in immovable created through all type of mortgages. So at one go, anybody, whether it's a member of the public or a business or anybody, can get the complete details about the charges that has been created on the immovable properties. And the information utility, this is a new institution, which is a unique institution in the whole world. India is the first to have such a institution. Here, through this, here it is a complete repository of all loans and advances issued by any bank, any NBFC, and anybody. So anybody can have a complete up-to-date information about his liabilities through this institution. And the record kept here will become the legal evidence for starting any of the actions against or the claim against one another. And the fourth, the account aggregator, this is a new type of institution which will aggregate all your assets across very many financial institutions, and you can have a single view, and based on this view you can take your own decisions. You can avail advices from your financial advisors or give it to the banks or institutions who need proof of your assets. So all these 4 types of institutions over the period, they're all going to grow and help us in developing in a very, very big way. India now has, as I said, the set of institutions which together provide information on one's assets, liabilities, charges, and the transaction. Such information will be authentic, reliable, up-to-date, wholesome, and with full legal authority. This will empower individuals and businesses with certainty of ownership of assets, validity of claims, authenticity of transactions. This will also make us reasonable, responsible, and conscientious borrowers. This will go a long way in furthering businesses, trade and commerce, thereby increasing employment, income, etc. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for enlightening us with these concepts that are mostly cerebral to us, but you really broke it down. Thank you so much for, you know, the body of work that you represent in the central banking and, you know, the fintech entities. So thank you so much for your contribution. And we'd like to present to you a small token of our affection in honor of the work you do. We acknowledge you, sir, as a leader of the decade in banking and finance. Please accept this virtual award on behalf of the All Ladies League at the Women Economic Forum. We congratulate you and thank you from the bottom of our hearts.
Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen,
thanks
Mr.
a lot for all of you. Wish you well.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Have a beautiful afternoon. Thank you.